Good evening. I apologize for the angle, but this is the best way I can film in my room. I am in dress code. I've got dress shoes on and khakis and a shirt, but that's the best I could do, angle-wise. I am Matthew Clayton, and I'm here today, to talk about gun control, or in more specific terms, whether or not gun control laws should be made more strict in the modern United States. And the first thing I want to say is that this is a very large politically divisive issue between the two parties in our country, and start out by saying that firstly, after my research, I do not think that gun control laws should be made more strict for a few very specific reasons. But first, I want to address the foundation of gun control law and really gun policy in our country, in addition to the fake news and media opinions surrounding this topic. So, there's currently a lot of fake news or hysteria in the media around guns. You see on the news headlines all the time, AR-15, mass shooting and stuff. And not to say that those aren't issues, but there's also a great amount of hysteria surrounding those issues. So people automatically assume that we need more strict gun control to solve those problems, when in theory or in reality, that's not a plausible solution. So I'd like to start by reading out the Second Amendment, which is the foundation for gun control policy in the United States. A well-regulated militia, being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms. This means that states have the right to organize their own militia, and people in general have the right to bear weapons in the United States. And there are three particular reasons that gun control policy should not be made any more strict than this. Firstly, because gun control or the gun industry is a very large part of the United States economy. Secondly, because gun policy in the current day is great for self-defense. And thirdly, because modern gun control policy protects the American way of life. The first reason that gun control laws should not be made more strict is because it runs the risk of hurting the gun manufacturing industry, which is very important to the economy of the United States. The gun manufacturing industry creates a total of 311,991 jobs, and this comes from a very reliable source of the Federal Gun Control Bureau. And within the first 3 months of this year, 2019, 257,000 people immigrated to this country. So, in the face of a crisis where we are running out of jobs because there are so many people coming into the country, we can't afford to get rid of an industry that employs that many people. And not only the amount of people it employs, the industry generates 52 billion, 87,506,400 a year, including the money it makes from exports, the money it makes domestically, and the money it pays to people, as well as the money it pays out to people for the raw resources that it buys to make the guns, right? So those are all contributors to the United States economy. So with the gun manufacturing industry producing more than $52 billion a year, it's a major part of contributing money to the U.S. economy, which is extremely important right now as the United States faces a national debt greater than $23 trillion. The second reason that gun control laws should not be made more strict is because of self-defense. So, current gun legislation is great for self-defense. You can get all sorts of licenses to own essentially any type of firearm that you want, as long as you acquire the proper licensing and go through the proper mental health background checks and background checks into your past to make sure that you're allowed to own that type of gun, right? And it's very important that we have guns for self-defense in the face of a growing threat from white supremacy-related crime and terrorism, as we can see in New Zealand with the Christchurch shooting, or with school shootings in many schools. So it can be seen that self-defense is um, a very important aspect of why gun control laws should not be made more strict. But a common counter-argument to this is that people say if there were no guns, nobody would need a gun to defend themselves. But this is not necessarily true. Criminals often go to illegal lengths to acquire the weapons that they use to commit crimes. 300,000 guns are stolen in America per year, and that's not the only way people illegally acquire firearms anyway. Oftentimes, people acquire firearms that they use to carry out crimes, especially higher grade weapons like assault weapons and explosives, through black market trade or support from terrorist organizations in the first place. So the logic there essentially exists that people who would murder or commit acts of violence using a gun normally don't care enough about the law to acquire the weapon that they use in the first place. So creating stricter gun control laws to try and control crimes that are committed with guns in the United States really only hurts self-defense and makes people even easier targets for white supremacists and terrorists who would like to take them down. The third reason that gun control laws should not be made more strict is a little bit more abstract. So, starting out, we can move back to the Second Amendment, which states that a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms. This idea shows us that people essentially in the Constitution have a given right to be allowed to bear weapons. And people often ask, what purpose does that serve? Well, to figure that out, we have to go back to the concept of a social contract. A social contract is essentially an agreement that a government and its people have where the people of, or the citizens of that government, hand over a certain amount of rights in exchange for protection. Well, our Constitution is a very advanced version of a social contract that contains a Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments and everything added after it, are the rights that our government, our citizens agreed that citizens have within our government. And the right guaranteed in the Second Amendment to bear arms is not only to protect from self-defense, but it's to protect citizens from tyranny. Considering the time when the Second Amendment was drafted, it's important to note that the people who drafted it were part of a revolution. The Second Amendment, when taken in context, should be noted that people are meant to protect themselves from tyranny, not just people who might try to harm them. The Second Amendment was created so that people might have the ability to remove their just consent of the governed from those who might try to tyrannize them in the future. And this can be seen as a contrast between our modern, more democratic Republican government versus a dictatorship. Our modern democratic Republican government derives just consent from the idea that people choose their leaders. In a dictatorship, this isn't true. But it can also be said that our government is getting far less democratic because of a little thing called executive orders. As we can see from this chart of checks and balances that I have, the executive branch, the legislative branch, and the judicial branch are all separated. And for this, the purposes of this presentation, we'll be focusing mostly on the legislative and executive branches. The legislative branch is responsible for creating legislation. This means that they tell the president or executive what to enforce. So, an executive order is essentially a law that a president can place for his term to say, this is a law during my term, and it must be enforced, and then he enforces it. And its intended purpose is to help serve the country during emergencies. But that's not how it's gone recently. Presidents Trump and Obama have both used more executive orders than any presidents before them. And it's starting to creep into the legislative powers, see? Because they are only supposed to enforce what they say is the law. But now, executives are taking over the job of lawmaking from the legislative branch, so that only these two branches exist anymore, right? The legislative branch has far less power than they used to because of this act of executive orders. The judicial branch's job is to make sure that laws are constitutional. They have no bearing on executive orders, which means that in a day where more and more executive orders are being used, there's no way to stop it. Laws aren't followed, and the judicial branch has no way to stop executive orders from being passed. They have no way to judge that it's unconstitutional. This means that firearms must be guaranteed as a right to the people to ensure that they have a way to remove their just consent to the governed in the face of tyranny from a corrupt executive. So, in conclusion, firearm laws must not be made more strict because current firearm legislation is good for self-control, it's good for the economy, and it allows the people to remove their just consent to the government from a future possibly tyrannical government.